Welcome. Thank you for finding your way here. This is a place for anyone who needs a moment of solace. A place to just listen, relax, and let your world slow down for a bit. Settle in with me as we continue our journey through Pale Light's Book 1, Lost Things by ErraticErrata. Chapter 12. It was an unusual experience, Tristan mused, to be treating others using a poisoner's kit in ways he had largely learned through study of interrogation. Not that anyone could tell the difference. I don't need a stick to bite down on, Felix insisted. It's just a little pain. I can take it. In most circumstances, the man might even have been right. Regular use of dust could dull one's sense of pain. Not so here, however. Ines fretted at her husband's side, but he kept pushing her away. I once saw a man bite through his own tongue, Tristan conversationally said. It didn't kill him. It is not usually a lethal wound, you see, but it did seem to be an excruciatingly painful experience. The dust addict paled, fiddling with his choppy brown hair. Are you much of a singer, Felix? The thief asked. The man glared, but he took the stick and placed his teeth against it. Tristan immediately ripped out the bolt, ignoring the half-swallowed scream that followed. It was a nasty little piece of work, the thief thought, as he eyed the arrow point the Hollows had used. Serrated, so that it would cut flesh again on the way out. Felix went through spasms of pain, shivering as Tristan set down the bolt and got to work cleaning the wound, a rag drenched in alcohol, then makeshift bandages made of ripped clothing. The man should be in no danger of bleeding out, but Tristan could not say if the flesh would take sick. Clothes made for poor bandages, and they had too few to spare for the thief to be able to change them often. It is much as I can do, he told Felix. I will give you something for the pain before you go to sleep. That made all of them. Vanessa and Ines had gotten away with little more than bruises. Franco's rib was sprained, but not broken, and Yong had taken no wound at all. After Felix, the worst off was Sarai. Pins and needles had ripped at the side of her face when her veils and mask were torn off. Those he had not taken care of. After borrowing alcohol to clean the wounds, she had seen to them herself. Of Lan, there was still no sign. Not that they would take her in should she return. What worth was there in keeping around someone who would run when the knives came out? Choices must be paid for. Felix spat out the stick and rose to his feet, striding away without another word. His wife stayed behind. Thank you, Tristan, Ines tiredly told him. He appreciates it as well. He just... Under the wariness and the wear, he could still see the shape of the woman she must have been when she was young. Dark hair and kind brown eyes, a heart-shaped face and slender frame. The kind of looks men of the Merc considered beautiful. This place, it doesn't bring out the best in us, he finished. It will be better when we get out. No, it won't, Tristan thought. The thief hesitated. He had decided not to involve himself too closely with the pair, wary of getting caught in the inevitable explosion, but now their company's numbers had thinned and wounds had been taken. If he could nudge their situation into coming to a head a little later, perhaps the second trial, it would be a boon. Lan ran off with the dust, he said. How long before it gets bad? Ines' smile did not quite hide the shame in her eyes. Notice that, did you? She asked. I thought you might. You've got murk all over you. And they both knew that dust and the other drugs peddled there killed people just as sure as the plague, only slower and uglier. The dark-haired woman worried her lip. 2 days, she finally said. Maybe longer if you extract before the pain scratches the itch some. That could be a problem, Tristan admitted. One he did not have much to mend, save if one counted poison as a solution. The sound Ines answered by was too bleak to truly be called a laugh. Yeah, she exhaled. I know. Gods, I know. It seems ill-advised, he delicately said, to be taking these trials given his condition. His more than hers. Ines seemed as needful of gambling as her husband was of dust, or her body would not rebel at the lack of it. It was an affliction of the mind more than the flesh. He already knew they had not come here by choice, that they had been paid for by others. But tired and grateful as she was, a small invitation like this should be enough to get her talking. Do you think we had a choice? Ines bitterly replied. We both racked up debts with the Cordero Sonriente. Only we didn't know about each other's. One of their collectors put it together, came knocking at our door. Tristan winced. The Cordero Sonriente had begun as a charitable house the infant zones had meant to clothe and feed the poor souls of the Merc. But infamously, within a year, it had begun selling goods on the side and running whores in its chapter houses. The Guardia never raided them, after all, lest the noble patrons be offended. By the time the thief was born, the Cordero had branched into loans as well and earned a hard reputation among that crowded trade. They were respectable enough they could afford to pay the Red Cloaks to come and collect for them, and the Guardia did not play nice when it came to the Merc. Yeah, that bad, Ennis sighed. The debt was big enough we would have been bound for the mines until we died. Only we have 5 kids, and no one who could take care of them. So when they offered to wipe the debt if we took the trials, it wasn't much of a choice at all. They would not have made the offer without getting something out of it, Tristan said. Ines convulsed, and with some surprise, the thief realized that she was crying. It was not the tears that surprised him. He choked on bitter sobs in his time. It was that she would allow herself to shed them before a man half a stranger. Tristan gently put a hand on her shoulder, but did not take her into his arms as an impulse demanded. He knew better than to get attached. It's a sport to them, she croaked out. They pay the Black Cloaks for the reports after, so they know what happened in the trials. What did they tell you, Ines? He pressed. They'll drown my children, she whispered, if Felis kills me before the end of the trials. Sympathy welled up, but only a shallow stream. Most of his mind was on the talk he had overheard between the two, the way Felis had pushed for them to leave the group, to go off alone. Just as Ines must have come to, he grew sure the Cordero must have promised him something if he killed her before the end of the trials. Red games, Young had called these. What a pretty turn of phrase for such an ugly thing. He kept Ines company until the tears ran out and she muttered some excuses. returning to her cot like someone who did not know where else to go. Felix began a whispered argument with her within moments, and Tristan decided to wait before he went over with the painkiller. Instead, it was to Yong's side he went, sitting by the man as he oiled and cleaned his sword. The Tianxi glanced his way with an inquisitive look. "I don't think they're salvageable," Tristan frankly said, careful not to glance the pair's way as he did. They were pointed at each other by their creditor. "They're useful in a fight," Yang just as frankly replied. "I'd be more inclined to get rid of the gray hairs than these two if we must cut weight loose." "I'm not saying we cut them," he replied, "but they can't be trusted for anything delicate. Only a matter of time until one knifes the other." Either Felix for what he had been promised, or Ines to avoid the same. "Come the second trial, they are no longer our trouble," Yang pragmatically said. "Will they last until then?" Tristan grimaced. "Probably," he conceded, then passed a hand through his hair. "Marriage, huh? What a fool's game." Yang shot him a highly amused look. "You are speaking," the Tianxi said, "to a married man." "Ah," the thief coughed. "I mean no offense. I'm sure your wife—" "Husband," Yang dryly corrected. "Husband is a fine man," Tristan hastily assured him. "He is," the other man replied, but a hint of something lay under the even tone. "But I'll grant you, it can sometimes make for a crowded bed. Each other and our pasts all squeezed tight." Much as the thief was itching to poke at that to see what might come out, a look at Yang's face was enough for him to decide otherwise. It was a closed shutter. The Tianxi was shifting restlessly in that way Tristan had come to recognize as meaning he wanted to drink. The earlier violence seemed to have invigorated Yang enough that he'd not drunk liquor all afternoon, but now the clouds were returning. Best to head that off as hard as he could. The day's fighting had proved anything. It was that without Yang, they were all halfway to the grave. "I'm glad you are now calm," Tristan said, "for you seemed angry when you first saw Sarai's looks under the mask." "Hollows can't be trusted," the Tianxi bluntly said. "If she had been one, either she or I would have left this company." "I have not found them any worse than men," the thief said. "Is this a matter of faith?" No one, not even cultish redeemers, denied the truth of the circle perpetual, the endless cycle of reincarnation that bound all souls not marred by the gloam. Be a darkling, hollow, was to be evicted from the circle and see your immortal soul tarnished into mortality. There were faiths of Vesper who thought this a great sin, something disgusting or wicked, and so thought hollows disgusting and wicked as well. The orthodoxy should not be one of them, but then in practice, Tristan knew precious little of the Cathayan orthodoxy. "It is a matter of fact," Yang replied. "All men go mad when law runs thin, Tristan. When there are no more punishments, the savagery we pretend we've never learned comes creeping out." His dark eyes looked at something beyond the cast of the lantern's light, the kind of haunting that could be a world away and still closer than your own skin. "I've seen men I thought decent rape and steal and kill for no better reason than they could," he said. "In the end, all our cruelties, we are still men." Former soldier's jaw clenched. "I've found half-eaten children by the road," Yang said, with desolate calm, where hollows went raiding. I've tread over the broken bones of hundreds fed to mad gods, seen the aftermath of ritual so horrifying, even the worst of Iskali candlemen would balk at their use. His tone had not grown heated, but it had risen loud enough they were drawing looks. We still curse by the old night for a reason, he said, lowering the pitch of his voice after he noticed the attention. That is the world hollows would bring back. Darkness for all, forever. No trust can or should survive that truth. Tristan slowly nodded, keeping his thoughts off his face. He would not argue with Yang, not when the subject drew such fervor from the other man, but he was not convinced. There were entire kingdoms of hollows out there, great empires risen and fallen beyond the cast of the glare. Scholars were certain that most of Vesper belonged to the hollows, and if Yang were right, then the old knight would long ago have been brought back. No, Tristan suspected that most hollows were no better or worse than men. Shaped differently, by circumstance, perhaps, but not made of such different clay. It was the cults that were things of horror, and a cult was not a kingdom, much less 100 of them. I'll not argue with killing those red-eye bastards, the thief said, though I hope you'll forgive me if I'd rather sneak past them if we can. Yang waved his words away. So would I, he said. I can only wince at how Sarai must have suffered for her people's resemblance to hollows. I expect half the people she's ever met have tried to clap her in chains. Not Tianxi, no? Tristan asked. I thought the republics didn't hold with slavery. All are free under heaven, Yang dutifully quoted. It's against all the laws on all the books, it's true. But it doesn't stop some of the traders from shipping slaves. Ah, Tristan thought. Transporting the merchandise was not buying or selling it, he deduced, which allowed the unscrupulous to follow the letter of the law. He was no longer a boy of 10, blindly admiring that the Tianxi had sent all their nobles to the chopping block, and dreaming their land a veritable paradise. The heavenly republics were just as flawed a beast as the other great powers of Vesper. He knew that. But he was still disappointed, somehow, that men who'd made themselves free would force the opposite on others. The slave trade has made Milan rich, he sighed, and the man who hates gold has yet to be born. The Second Empire had used slaves by the millions, and most people of Vesper still did. The infant zones might not call them such, but the hollows mining rubies and gold for them were slaves indeed. Yet it was only ever hollows that Liergan had kept in chains. That time, that practice, had come at an end. The kingdom of Milan had grown terribly wealthy by stealing men in the north and shipping them to their western colonies, where they toiled raising rich crops under the glare for their masters. And the tribes below the broken gates were very much men, for though they were pale of skin, they were not severed from the circle perpetual. The glare did not burn them. Yang snorted. When I was a boy, he said, my grandmother told me it was Lucifer himself that made gold, for he knew that even sealed in pandemonium, gold would be enough for men to destroy themselves. Tristan could not help but smile. It seemed that no matter where you were born, families tried to scare you with stories of the king of hell. My father used to tell me how he invented sleep, the thief said, by botching a spell to kill all the world. That's a clever one, Yang appreciated, then wiped his sword down one last time. And a timely reminder of what I ought to do. Franco still has first watch? Tristan nodded. Good. Gray hairs need to earn their keep, former soldier said. Will you speak with Sarai before turning in for the night? The thief cocked an eyebrow. Should I? He asked, surprised. Who if not you? Yang shrugged. The two of you have been fingers from the same hand since we left the Yiwu. He frowned, recognizing the Cathayan word, but not the meaning. Relics? Nobles, Yang explained, smiling. There was a calm certainty behind that smile, the look of a man who knew the way of the world was headed, and that its road would inevitably be paved with graves of his enemies. And who was Tristan to argue that? The Tianxi still chopped kings into 4 pieces whenever they got their hands on them. And no crown and vesper had been able to make them stop. Parting ways with the still smiling man, Tristan flicked a glance Sarai's way. She was sitting alone, Ines and Felis giving her wide berth. And while Vanessa had not been driven off by the pale skin, the speckled old woman was sound asleep. He'd barely exchanged 20 words with her since her face was revealed, Tristan realized. They'd had to run half a day. He'd spent all his time since camp was made seeing to wounds. Perhaps the conversation truly was due, even if exhaustion was catching up to him. Sitting across from Sarai's pack, the thief popped his neck and let out a little sigh of satisfaction at the ensuing crack. He got an unimpressed look from the dark-haired woman for it. You could have done that before coming over, she said. And lest you miss out, Tristan charmingly smiled. You wound me. Do it again, and I just might, Sarai threatened. Her lips twitched. I can't stand the sound. I will take that in due consideration, the thief assured her. There was a pause, and as he met her eyes, he deliberately reached for his thumb with deliberate obviousness and the most obnoxious grin in his repertoire. Don't you dare, she warned. How's the face? Tristan idly asked. Fine, he warily said, eyes still on his thumb. Though the cuts aren't deep and... The thief pulled at his thumb before she could finish the sentence. A small crack of the joint popping, getting an indignant cry out of her. He was forced to shield his face with his arms while she enthusiastically began beating him with her veil. By the time she'd finished retaliating, the two of them were grinning. Sarai shook her head, reluctantly pleased. The cuts won't even scar, she told him. I'd had worse shaving my legs. How are your burns? Better than they've any right to be, he honestly replied. They're clean, and the flesh is red instead of black, which is a good sign. That he felt pain around it was a good sign, for great burns bit deep enough you could no longer feel any pain there at all. The bruise on my side is more of a pain, Tristan said. It's a good thing I already slept on my back. I'll be doing the same for a few weeks, I think, Sarai grunted. Shallow they may be, but I can't rest on them without hissing. He nodded in sympathy, the two of them sitting in comfortable silence for a while. It was him that broke it, almost to his regret. Are we going to talk about it? He idly asked. The secret that'd come out, all the petty little things tied to it. No, Sarai replied. He cocked his head to the side. If we survive the trials? Then I'll give you my name, Sarai agreed. My real one. If you want more, you will have to trade in kind. Fair bargain, as tended to be her way. Past is past, Tristan shrugged. I am more interested in what is to come. A request for information less dear, but more immediately pressing. How far did Sarai intend to go on this dominion of lost things? Blue eyes considered him. At the end of the trials, Sarai said, I'll be wearing a black cloak. That is my aim as well, Tristan replied, pleased and not hiding it. It meant their alliance would continue until the end, with Yang intending to join the watch as well. We would have two reliable companions to go into the coming trials with. Sarai passed a hand through her dark tresses, face closing, then let out a sigh. This year's trials, she said, lowering her voice, are not like the others. He stared at her, unblinking. Some of us were marked for more than simply joining the watch, Sarai said. He could not muster much surprise. He had known something was off since first setting foot on the Bluebell. Some things were not adding up. Abuela had given him a shot at Cosmea Floor, and a pair of Surdans by sending him here. But there had been... No. But there had been other ways. His mentor did not simply want him in the watch. She had warned him on that particular ship. Why? You are one of those chosen few, I take it, Tristan asked. I am, he said, smiling faintly. I am, she said, smiling faintly. But so are you. Despite their best effort, that knowledge did more to keep him awake than the bruises. The tall grass felt sinister, now that they knew what might be waiting for them hiding behind the stalks. Company had taken wounds, enough to smell of blood, and that meant they had to worry about more than the cultists of the Red Eye now. That they'd broken camp and resumed their march. Lupines would prefer the open paths. Lupines would prefer the open plains to the tall grass they were cutting through. But there were many kinds of lemures out there. The first creature they found, though, were not lemures at all. Early in the morning, Linus let out a small scream that had them all going for weapons. What she had almost stumbled over did not end up warranting such dread. On the ground were a pair of wobbly carapace gloves, from which tails. Early in the morning, Ines let out a small scream that had them all going for weapons, but what she had almost stumbled over did not end up warranting such dread. On the ground were a pair of wobbly carapace globes, from which tails with maces at the end protruded. The tails were being waved menacingly, though Tristan would have felt rather more menaced if the creature it belonged to was not cowering blindly inside his carapace. Those are glyptons, Vanessa pointed out amusedly. No threat to you, my dear, unless your feet are made of reeds. They're harmless, then? Ines carefully asked. Usually herbivores, Franco confirmed. He was met with an uncomprehending and somewhat worried look. A creature that eats only plants, old professor clarified. Silent reproach on Ines's face at not having simply said that from the start had the thief smothering a smile. I recall reading that they favor mud, Tristan said. We might be near a pond we'll need to go around. Franco shook his head. They prefer flowing water, the toothless old man corrected. For cleaning their scales. A river, more like. And if one of you gentlemen would do me the favor of tipping one over? That seems unnecessarily cruel, Yang objected half-heartedly. Sarai, not so burdened, borrowed the Tianshi's musket and carefully rolled one of the glyptons upside down while avoiding the mace tail. Other let out a strange mouse-like squeak, tail disappearing inside like it'd been sucked in, and promptly began a strategic retreat. It had abandoned its fellow quite ruthlessly, the thief noted. No honor among glyptons either, huh? He muttered. Meanwhile, Franco was coughing into his hand as he leaned over the belly-up glypton that Sarai was holding down with the butt of the musket while it tried to flee. Aside from the 4 stumpy legs Tristan had expected there, though, was what looked like a round mouth in the middle of the belly, surrounded by wiggling brown tentacles and a set of horn-like mandibles. Ugh. Franco, however, looked quite pleased. This is a reed glypton, he informed happily, a particular species that subsists not only on weeds, but also small fish and the frogs. Ines shot him a betrayed look. Her foot had been risked after all. Why should we care? Felis said, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. Because it means the river ahead shouldn't have predators large enough to bother our little friend, she replied. Allowing the glypton to flip back on the ground. It scuttled away into the grass, tail waving at them in what might have been meant to be a warning, but ended up looking like a child enthusiastically waving goodbye. Felis still looked mullish. He'd been in a foul mood all day, and there was no mystery as to why. So Young elaborated further. There should not be anything large enough to attack us as we cross it, the Tianshis. All agreed it was best to go through instead of around, time being the greatest of luxuries, and with a little luck, running water behind them might even put off lemures on their tail. It was not long before they could hear the flowing water. And within a quarter hour, they'd reached muddy banks. The water did not go deeper than the waist of the shortest among them, toss-up between Ines and Vanessa now that land was gone. The current was strong, but not impossible to manage. A glyptont was hiding in reeds further downriver, thought, thoughtfully chewing at stalks that poked right out and wobbled with every chew, while frogs croaked a quiet welcome. They took a short pause to fill their water skins and wash their faces before beginning the crossing. Tristan volunteered to go first, as someone must, and found the footing treacherous but hardly dangerous, if you took your time. They took a short pause to fill their water skins and wash their faces before beginning the crossing. Tristan volunteered to go first, as someone must, and found the footing treacherous but hardly dangerous if you took your time. He called back to be careful with the stones at the bottom, which were slippery, and waited for Sarai to throw him the end of the rope. He found a fallen, rotting tree to tie it to while she secured it to a stone on the other end, their company then going about getting their affairs across. His medicine cabinet, in particular, required much careful handling not to take water. It already proved its worth, so there was only minimum grumbling about the work. Yang was to be the last across, and Vanessa was halfway through, a lot of them nearly in the clear, so naturally, Tristan was already tense as a string when it all went wrong. They should have seen it coming, tall as it was, or even heard it. But it was a hunter, and so there was no trace at all until it was out of the tall grass. The beak first, a cruelly curved thing black as tar that rose as the creature stretched into its full height, at least 10 feet, a cascade of deep purple feathers, flecked with wriggling pale blue eyes. Its legs were bone, ending in great curved claws, and from under folded wings, skeletal arms peeked out. The eyeless head should have felt like a bird's, all creased leather, but instead Tristan was somehow certain a man was looking at him. He did not need to be told what he was looking at. Night terror, eye taker, a grave bird. Do not, Tristan began, tone forcefully even. Then Ines screamed, and it all went to hell. The grave bird wailed, and the thief flinched, sound echoing between his ears until he had to scream to let it out. His tongue tasted of blood. Eyes wild, he fumbled for his knife even as Sarai swallowed a sob behind him. It was on Yang in an instant, cruel beak tearing into the Tianshi's shoulder as he tried to draw his sword. He fell with a scream. Tristan rushed to the water as the grave bird gobbled down the flesh it ripped, blue eyes on its feathers slowly beginning to spin. They were beautiful, he thought, but then Fortuna let out a shout of alarm and he tore his gaze away. "Don't look at the eyes," he yelled. "Jabali," Sarai cursed. Then he heard someone getting slapped across the face. Felix let a bellow of anger, but Tristan had no time for this. He reached for Vanessa. The old woman was panicking, had fallen halfway to her knees slipping on stone, and the hand not clutching the rope felt slick as a fish when she caught his own. They struggled to drag her out of the river. Yang, he was on the wrong side, and sometimes luck was not kind. Most of the time, really. Only when Tristan glanced up, the creature was not finishing off the former soldier. It was looking at them instead, slinking forward and through the water like it didn't feel the current at all. The grave bird moved unhurriedly, so sure they were all meat on the plate, it was taking the time to toy with them. It let out another wail, and Tristan shouted back to ward it off. Fortuna shouting with him, their voices threading as one. But Vanessa clapped her hands over her ears. The moment she no longer held the rope, the current took her, would have swallowed her downstream if not for the orb of gloam that formed in her way. The old woman hit it like she'd been thrown, crying out in pain, but clutched it so she would not be swept away. "Quick!" Sarai yelled. "I can't!" Skeletal fingers gently cradled Vanessa's cheek, the grave bird pulling her close, and Tristan watched with horror as the other bone hand went for her right eye. He threw his knife, but the grave bird dismissively flicked its feathers, and it barely sliced into one of them. The blade went with the current, and now he was out. The other knife was with his pack. All he had was a broken relic pistol, and gods. Vanessa screamed, the grave bird ripping out the eye and placing it in a featherless hollow under its throat. One more feather in the making. Vanessa's eye gone blue, painted over it. They were all going to die, Tristan realized. He needed to run to... The shot took the grave bird in the side of the head. It let out a cry of fury, but though Yang flinched at the sound like the rest of them, former soldier tossed down his musket, pulled his pistol. Another shot in the side of the head, magnificently placed. Feathers went flying, and Tristan glimpsed black flesh like a sea of worms. There was a hole there, staying made through the ball was... There was a hole there, staying made, though the ball was already falling out. It would change nothing. A gravebird had as many lives as it had eyes. They had been worshipped as gods once. Yang was out of triggers to pull, so the wounded man drew his blade. Tristan watched numbly as the gravebird's skeletal hand reached for Vanessa's second eye. "It seeds fear in you," Fortuna whispered into his ear. "That is what the whales are really for. You are not helpless." He let out a laugh that was half a sob, desperately fighting the current to stay standing. What was he to do? Hit the monster with his broken pistol? Absurd as the thought was, it was still better than nothing, so he reached for the pistol, and as the wet wood slid against his palm, his gaze found the engravings on the side. "Please," Vanessa begged. "Please." And Tristan, fool that he was, palmed his priceless treasure. A piece of radimenting quartz, burning with the glare's light. And then, as he met Fortuna's smiling golden eyes, he borrowed luck. The ticking began, but he paid it no mind. All he needed was a moment. The thief threw the stone, and just as he did, the grave bird turned, with perfect, impossible timing. The radimenting quartz tumbled right into the hole in the side of the creature's head, and it got stuck. The grave bird's scream of complete and utter fury was so loud he couldn't hear the ticking when he released the luck. He snatched Vanessa by the back of her chemise, half tearing it, and got her out of the way just as the gravebird began blindly flailing. It was in pain, shaking and screaming, but the quartz was well and stuck. Burn from the inside, he thought with vicious satisfaction. No Lemure enjoyed the touch of the glare. Vanessa had grown deadened from pain and shock, her eyes empty. But she moved when he pushed, and the two of them fell to their knees in the mud of the riverbank. On the other side of the river, the grave bird was slashing at the ground in fury. Yang, having wisely fled into the water while it was distracted. "Go help him across," Tristan ordered a gaping Felis, pulling Vanessa to her feet. Franco was unconscious, he saw, so he told Ines to get him awake. Past the bespectacled, only half now, the grave bird had ripped through the glasses to get to her eye, old woman to a sickly Sarai. They needed to take their bags and run before the grave bird rid itself of the corpse or do something else worse. Going for his own affairs, only then did Tristan realize the price he'd pay for his throne. His throw. Down the banks his medicine cabinet lay against a jutting rock, broken and half submerged. It tumbled down the slope while no one paid attention, half its contents spilling into the water or being ruined by it. He'd have to salvage what he could, carelessly throwing all the stuff inside, warning as he already saw there would be no more painkillers. He flicked a glance upriver and found Yang was being helped out of the water by Felis. On the other side, the grave bird had gone into the tall grass. But its screams betrayed it had not yet gone far. Shoving the broken cabinet onto his back, the thief joined the others. Franco was back on his feet, looking half asleep and half dead. The whale had hit him much harder than anyone else. His eyes were still white with dread. "We have to get moving right now," Tristan said. "Anyone who can't keep up is left behind." No one argued, for all knew that if the grave bird's scream had not drawn the cult, or yet... Ooh, interesting. One more time. No one argued, for all knew that if the grave bird's scream had not drawn the cult of the red eye yet, then Yang's two shots most certainly had. The tall grass was the only reason they lived. At least 3 war bands were scouring the land looking for them, and in the open, they would have been dead within the hour. Instead, by hook and crook, they hid and muddled on. Twice they had to lie down in mud at the bottom of crevices as hollows passed above them. Shadows lingering as they spoke amongst each other in a tongue older and harsher than Antigua. Their path was circuitous, Yang keeping them on grounds that would leave them no easy tracks to find as they stumbled on. Tristan had taken just long enough to see it to it that his and Vanessa's wounds would not kill them before pressing on. But while he still had alcohol, he no longer had numbing agents. They would all be feeling their wounds. Squirming through filth and bushes, they made their way forward. After some hours, exhaustion became too much, forcing breaks, but no one slept well for long. They could not afford to stay in one place for too long. They could not afford to stay in place for too long with the cultists combing through the grass. Their company kept moving through the night, stealing away the odd hour of sleep when it could. Start of the third day since they had split from the rest was not auspicious. Everyone's exhaustion sharpened tempers and slowed down the gray hairs even further. Felix was prickly as porcupine, constantly scratching at his arms and picking fights with the others. Young had threatened to cut out his tongue to get him to lay off Vanessa, whom he accused of breathing so loudly she would draw the red-eyed cult onto them at all. The sole relief was that all that their pace had slowed to a crawl. Sarai believed they were approaching the eastern bridge across the river. Halfway through morning, they found a toppled column rising out of the tall grass, enough so that when Tristan climbed atop it, he was able to have a look further ahead. Good and bad, the thief told them when he came down. I believe I saw the silhouette of the statue that Sarai chose as our marker. We were at most half a day away from the bridge. And the bad? Vanessa resignedly asked. The tall grass ends soon. There's a span of open grounds between it and the beginning of the forest. And open grounds could well be the death of them all, if there were any cultists keeping an eye out for them. Their company broke out into murmurs, save for Franco, who had laid a hand on the broken column and gone into his own mind with unseeing eyes. After the others agreed that they should first head to the edge of the tall grass before deciding whether or not to risk it, Tristan shook the old man out of his reverie. Not with his hand. Never knew with contracts. But with the butt of his useless pistol. Ah, the toothless professor muttered. Yes, we are going. I see. You weren't dozing off, Tristan said. You were listening to the stone. The old man nodded, quietly, coughing into his hand. It is not from here, Franco said. Thief cocked a questioning eyebrow. It was stolen from a temple, brought here by cultists to serve as a watchtower of sorts. The professor elaborated. The men who carried them had strong opinions about being ordered to do this, and one broke his leg when it was dropped on it. That was vivid. You hear their voices, Tristan slowly said, as if hearing their old conversations It was in poor form to inquire as to another's contract, but if the old man wanted to unburden himself, who was he to argue? Franco grimaced, shaking his head. Not so. It is more along the lines of what their hearts felt when they touched the stone, he tried. Hear resonance of moments that were, nothing exact. It was still the kind of contract some would gladly murder over, Tristan thought. If it truly could steal secrets out of stone this way. How many bloody old lies would Franco drag out of graves should he care to go looking into the past of Sacramonte, or any city in the world for that matter? Useful regardless, Tristan simply said, then gestured for him to move. Come on. Their company resumed the march, creeping towards the end of the tall grass with an obsessive care for quiet. Tristan kept an eye on Franco as they moved, looking for the trace of a price for the contract. but found none. Disappointing, but not surprising. Gods did not always like their dues easily found. It was because he was watching. He saw the old man suddenly stiffen, looking around for something more of them saw. Oh, looking around for something none of them saw. Mere feet away from the end of the tall grass, a stone block was buried, nestled between weeds with only a corner peeking out. The old man The old man discreetly ran his fingers against it while the others halted at the edge of the grass, eyes growing shadowed. You heard that stone's voice without pulling on your contract, Tristan thought. Was that his price then? Renko could hear the secrets of stone, but he could never cease hearing them? A blessing and a curse all at once. Fortuna hummed, having taken an interest when she noticed his. The goddess began idly turning around the toothless old man, looking at him like a haggler inspecting a horse. He doesn't seem like he's becoming harmonious, Fortuna wondered. But he'd have to if he was always listening at everything. His god would be in his head all the time. Harmonious, Tristan thought with a grimace. That was how the goddess called turning into a saint, which she insisted was a beautiful thing. There's probably some tricky clause, the Lady of Long Odds decided. Like he could only hear on odd hours or when some other condition is met. Hearing the stuff won't be his price either. It's just how his boon manifests. The thief made sure no one was looking at him before subtly nodding in acknowledgement. Someone decided to get fancy with him, Fortuna sneered, tossing back her golden hair as she stalked away. It's all very crass. Some parvenu god chortling at their own cleverness. Tristan could only fervently hope that the other god was not listening and taking offense, though he was distracted from that fresh worry by Yong's sudden intake of breath. Brushing aside Felis, Thief knelt at the Tianqi's side and peeked out of the grass. There was no need to ask what had made the other man react. The cultists were in plain sight, running across the flat grounds. A dozen armed hollows were rushing forward as they shouted. No, not forward. Away. They were fleeing the woods, Tristan realized. That, Sarai whispered from behind him, is not a good sign. The second sign they received that trouble had come was the mist. Clouds of it billowed out from the forest floor, almost like a wave of pale chasing the hollows. And from the dark of the trees, crushing trunks and stones in eerie silence, a massive silhouette came striding out. Legs thick as pillars swallowed the distance, chalk white and taller than men. In the cold light of the stars, Tristan glimpsed an enormity of pale flesh, with large wriggling heads full of perfectly oval eyes, each mass ending in a great tentacle. The clouds billowed past the fleeing hollows, their screams suddenly going silent for all that their mouths were still open. And their great mouths were still open. And the great monster began snatching them up. Try that sentence one more time. The clouds billowed past the fleeing hollows, their screams suddenly going silent for all that their mouths were still open, and the great monster began snatching them up. Under the heads opened a gaping maw full of jutting bone tusks, and there the hollows were carelessly impaled, and left to bleed out within the creatures. "A Heliodorn beast," Young whispered. "Fudge, the captain said it would be asleep." "She said it might be asleep," Tristan darkly replied. "It appears we're not that lucky." They watched, shivering in fear as the behemoth ate alive half the hollows and crushed a few more to death before wandering away in seeming boredom. The 3 cultists that survived ran into the tall grass well to the east of their company. Heading away as fast as they could. It was only minutes after the great Lemure was gone that the last of the mist dispersed, and the oppressive silence with it. Tristan ran a tired hand through his hair, worrying his lip. "We can't head for the bridge while that thing is prowling around there," Felis said. For once, no one argued with the man. "We need to wait it out," Young said. "Hide until it gets bored, then cross before the hollows return." "And if they come back before we do?" "We'd be walking right into an ambush," Ines asked. Neither was wrong. "We cannot stay here," Tristan said. "There's still warbands looking for us. We need a hiding place. And to rest." They were all exhausted and getting worse. If there was a fight, half of them would fold in the first 30 seconds of it. "The grass is full of cultists," Sarai bluntly said, "and creatures altogether worse. There is nowhere for us to hide." "That," Franco said, "is not entirely true." All eyes went to him. The old man let out a wet cough and wiped his lips with the back of his hand. "Several of the stones we've come across spoke of water," he said. "They were taken from an old temple that has been swallowed by a swamp. I believe it was built on a tributary of the river we encountered yesterday, somewhere to our southeast." "Are you trying to kill us, you old bastard?" Felis growled. "It'll be full of hollows, just like the first one." "No," Tristan frowned. "Not if they've been stripping it for parts. It's not a sacred place to them." "You don't know that," Felis bit out. "You're just guessing." "I am," the thief admitted, "but it seems likely to me. Do you have a better idea?" He did not, which settled the matter. Tristan ignored the whispered argument at the back of their company. Felis once more trying to convince his wife to leave, strike out on their own. Ines was much curter in response than she had been last time. It took them an hour and a half to find Franco's temple, the last half hour spent mostly on finding a way through swampy grounds that did not involve wading waist-high in mud. There was not a trace of hollows around when lantern light found the first curved gate jutting out of mud and filth. And Tristan could hazard a guess as to why. He'd seen great snakes slithering through the mud and larger shapes still in the water. He'd seen great snakes slithering through the mud and larger shapes still in the water, crocodiles or some creature that had the look of them. This was not a place friendly to either men or hollows. The old professor, however, guided them from stone to stone without once erring. They took an ancient pilgrim's path of raised stone across the water then passed through a dozen more curved gates to reach the temple itself. A squat square of a building, toppled by a dome, not toppled, sorry, topped by a dome that looked like a tulip's bud. It was, improbably enough, still standing. The swamp was nestled between overgrown hills, every inch of it infested with flies and croaking creatures. They were all eager to get out of the humid air and into the temple, which looked as if a storm had swept through. It had obviously been emptied of anything not nailed down by hollows. Columns ripped out and mosaics stripped of colors. What few streaks of ancient white paint had not been melted away by the elements were covered with filth and grime, the place dripping of it and stinking worse than pandemonium. "This is disgusting," Ines said, sounding like she was about to retch. "There is no better place," Franco told them, hopping up to a stone altar split in half, the younger man's enthusiasm. Behind it, the professor revealed narrow spiral stairs going down. "There's a ritual pool down there," he said, "that is older than the rest of this temple. At its back should be a hidden passage leading to a shrine that was all built over." Tristan could only ponder how formidably useful the old man's contract was proving to be, while glancing down at the slick, narrow stairs. "These are too small for all of us to squeeze through," he said. "We should send only a pair first." "As my old captain used to say, why, thanks for volunteering," Young drawled. The thief rolled his eyes. He had planned to go anyhow. He caught Sarai's eye, silently asking, and she nodded in agreement. Stairs felt like they were sweating, moss growing in every corner, and Tristan almost slipped thrice. There was no grip as the walls were just as slippery as the floor. The chamber at the bottom looked more like a bath than a ritual pool Franco had described. Square hole, full of scum water prefaced by cracked tiles, while insects scuttled in corners. Playing the lantern's light, there were a few columns on a ledge at the back, most of them broken. Sarai caught up to him, steps careful as she avoided slipping. She took a skeptical look around. "At least the smell is better than above," he finally said. "It's a start," Tristan conceded. The reflection of the stone in the water made it look like there was a full wall, but as Franco had promised, they found a passage tucked away behind a broken column. It was broad, but low, enough that Tristan had to crawl on his hands and knees after handing off the lantern. Sarai followed closely behind. The thief reached the end of the tunnel, dropping quietly onto the floor of what looked like a natural cavern. The ceiling was full of dripping stalactites, a slightly sloped floor leading up to what appeared to a shrine carved into the stone. The cavern wall had been sculpted so it would look like the wall of the shrine. Intricate silhouettes grasping each other's hands and feet in an endless chain. It cleverly made the shrine entrance look more than a vaguely oval hole in the stone that it was. He helped Sarai down, the two of them moving up the slope in careful silence. The ground was wet, the stalactites dripping down like knives dipped in blood, and there were insects scuttling just out of sight. Hand on his knife, Tristan suddenly gestured for Sarai. "Stop." He sniffed at the air, smelling smoke. and saw the same conclusion bloom in her eyes as his jaw tightened. They were not alone in here. Close the lantern, he murmured. We can't afford to be seen. Sarai grimaced, no more eager to be in the dark than he, but still worked the shutter until it closed. The two of them then resumed their way upwards, moving with care not to make a sound. As soon as they got a better angle on the shrine door, they saw that there was a trembling light inside. Pale, he thought. A lantern fed with glare oil or powder, which meant this could not be hollowers. Right? This could not be hollows. He knew better than to think it meant they were safe. Pressing onward, they pressed themselves against the sides of the threshold to peek inside. There, Kristen found a camp had been made inside the cramped shrine. Bedrolls laid down and packs piled up. There was even a small fire over which a pot was being made to boil, smelling of herbs. Two were tending to the food, and in the fire's light, Tristan recognized them immediately. Miranda Villager and her hired hand, the Milani huntsman, Zanule. Utterly surprised, he did not realize there was a third until she moved. The infant Zona had not been foolish enough to leave her back unguarded. There was an alcove tucked away, the side of the entrance, just inside, and there, someone who had been sitting was hastily getting up. They let out a noise of alarm, and the other two immediately turned. Sarai let out a curse, and Tristan brushed past her. Sarai let out a curse, and Tristan brushed past her, knife up, pushing the guard against the wall. Holding his blade to their throat even as Sarai yelled for the other two to stay back. Tristan Abriscal froze when a curl of firelight revealed the face of who he'd just taken hostage. Well, Lan mused, blue lips quirking as she swallowed the last of the bread she'd been chewing. This is awkward. And with that, we're going to leave the journey there for now. I hope you found a moment of solace. Thank you for being here, and take care. Until next time.